When my name echoed through the Pentagon Hall, the applause rose like thunder. Yet from the front row, my family stayed seated. My father's voice sliced through the silence. "She's not a hero. She's just lucky to still be breathing." The laughter that followed hit harder than the blast that nearly killed me overseas. I stood there, a medal of honor waiting to be pinned to my chest, while the people I loved most looked at me like I was an embarrassment wearing a uniform. That moment didn't just break something inside me. It erased everything I thought family meant. My name is Susan Sutton, and that day was supposed to celebrate my courage. Instead, it revealed the kind of betrayal no battlefield ever could. I once imagined this moment would feel like redemption. The weight of a purple heart pinned to my chest was supposed to make every scar mean something, proof that pain could turn into honor. But as the light caught the medal beneath the vaulted ceiling of the Pentagon Hall, all I saw staring back at me was my own reflection, alone among strangers. In the front row sat my family, my father Henry, my mother Eleanor, and my younger brother Kyle. They didn't clap. They didn't even look at me. My father sat with his arms crossed, his jaw tight, eyes fixed somewhere above the stage, as if enduring a meeting he didn't want to attend. Kyle leaned toward him, murmuring something that made them both smirk. When my gaze dropped to my father's wrist, the gleam of a Breitling watch caught the light, an expensive piece he could never have afforded before. When the general began reading my name, the crowd rose in applause. The sound of my own footsteps echoed sharply on the marble floor, hollow and rhythmic against the silence that seemed to thicken near the front row. I told myself not to look, but then his voice cut through everything, low, deliberate, sharp enough to draw blood. "She's not a hero. She's a whistleblower who got caught in her own mess." The air went still. Whispers spread like static, and the general froze mid-step, his gaze locking on my father with a chill that could slice through steel. "Mr. Sutton, you may want to remain seated. We'll revisit that." I stayed standing. My hands didn't tremble, but the rest of me turned to ice. The applause started again somewhere behind me, slow and unsure, and under the blinding white light, colder than the flash of that explosion years ago, I realized something I should have known all along. The people I spent my life protecting had never once stood up for me. 3 years before that ceremony, I was stationed in Djibouti, a land of sand, wind, and metal, where every sound seemed to echo off the desert like it was trapped inside a steel drum. My days blurred into checklists, test data, and long hours inside a hangar that smelled of jet fuel and salt. I was responsible for inspecting the fuel systems of tactical aircraft, running diagnostics that could mean the difference between flight and fire. One June evening, as the last shift cleared out, the world went white. The explosion threw me across the floor. Heat-swallowing sound, shards of steel slicing through the air. I remember the taste of burning plastic, the smell of blood, the way the concrete trembled beneath me. When I woke up, everything was silent on one side of my head. The doctor said I was lucky, but I knew better. 3 days before that night, I had filed an emergency report. Fuel readings were being manipulated. The software showed clean numbers, but the tanks told another story. Landon Aerospace, the contractor in charge of manufacturing the parts, had already been under quiet investigation for falsifying data. I'd sent the report straight to she and never heard back. Then came the fire. After my evacuation and weeks in a military hospital, they called it an accident, a systems error. I didn't argue. I couldn't even hear half the words they said. But deep down, I knew the blast wasn't a coincidence. Someone wanted that report buried. A month later, when I finally returned stateside for rehab, my mother called with her usual mix of concern and denial. She sounded cheerful, almost relieved. "Your father finally caught a break," she said. A former client paid him a large sum, just in time to pay off the mortgage. I asked who. "Some aerospace company," she said lightly. "Landon. Something." The room spun. My shoulder ached where the shrapnel had been pulled out, and I could almost feel the heat of that explosion rising again. I wanted to believe it was chance, but soldiers don't believe in coincidence, especially when the name that bought your father's comfort is the same one that nearly took your life. That call was the first spark of a realization I wasn't ready to face. Sometimes, the people cashing the checks are the same ones cashing in your blood. I tried to bury the thought, told myself I was paranoid, that trauma makes ghosts out of shadows. The doctors called it survivor's guilt. I called it instinct. But instincts have a way of clawing back to the surface. When the official notice came that I'd be awarded the Purple Heart, I thought maybe it was a sign that things were finally turning upward. Out of habit. I called home. My father's voice was the same dry drawl it had always been. That's something, I guess. Before I could answer, my mother's voice slipped in, soft, trembling. They're proud of you, sweetheart. Then he cut in again, a sharp laugh. So, they're paying you to stay quiet now? I froze. Kyle joined the call from somewhere in the background. Guess you finally blew something up right this time, huh? I didn't answer. I remembered every check I'd sent home over the years. Kyle's startup loan, Mom's insurance, Dad's endless home repairs. They'd always needed me, but never respected me. That's the thing about family. You can give them everything, and they'll still call it not enough. After I hung up, the silence in my decayed apartment felt heavier than the hospital ward had. Outside, the city was covered in gray clouds, the kind that never promise rain. Just the kind that hang there, waiting. I found myself thinking about General Reynolds, the man who had once overseen the Internal Ethics Board back when I first reported Landon Aerospace. He vanished after the explosion, retired early, no statement, no answers. I'd assumed he'd been told to stand down, the same way they told me to heal and forget. 2 days later, an official invitation arrived for the medal ceremony. I scanned it absent-mindedly until a line at the bottom stopped me cold. Beneath the typed signature was a line written by hand, one that didn't belong to standard protocol. Attend the ceremony, Captain. The truth needs witnesses. My pulse stumbled. There was only one man who'd ever written like that. Concise, deliberate, unafraid to provoke. General Reynolds. The medal no longer mattered. I didn't know what he planned to reveal, but I knew that whatever truth waited behind that stage, it wouldn't be the kind you polish or hang on a wall. It would be the kind that burns. When General Reynolds stepped to the podium, my heartbeat echoed in my chest like a countdown. His opening words were formal, the kind every soldier had heard before. Honor, valor, sacrifice. His voice was calm, precise, cutting through the quiet like a blade. Then his tone shifted. He paused, his gaze sliding to the front row, settling on my father, who still wore that smug grin as if nothing could touch him. Courage, Reynolds said, isn't just what you show on the battlefield. Sometimes, it's what survives when betrayal carries your own last name. The air crackled, heads turned. My father's smirk faltered, his fingers tightening around the armrest. Reynolds opened a leather folder, drew out a sealed envelope, and unfolded a stack of papers. His voice carried, deliberate and steady. This Purple Heart is not the only honor Captain Sutton deserves today. She also deserves the truth. The Department of Defense has concluded its audit on the Djibouti explosion. He read each line slowly, letting the silence between words twist the knife. Payments totaling $420,000 were wired to accounts under the names Henry and Kyle Sutton, 2 weeks before the blast. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. Those payments came from Landon Aerospace, the same company Captain Sutton had reported for falsifying safety data. Gasps broke the stillness. My mother's face drained white. She clutched my father's sleeve. Kyle's lips moved, but no sound came. My father shot to his feet, his voice booming through the hall. That's a lie. Sit down, Mr. Sutton, Reynolds commanded, sharp and cold. You'll have your say in court. My father's glare burned through me. You think you're saving this country? You just destroyed your family. I didn't move. I stood there as whispers spread, feeling the room split open around me. Then, someone in uniform began clapping. One slow, deliberate clap, followed by another, and another, until the sound became a steady rhythm behind me. Soldiers rose to their feet, their applause not for heroism, but for endurance. I didn't bow or cry. I simply stood, the metal catching the sterile light, while everything I once called home crumbled quietly beneath it. After the ceremony, they led me to a quiet room behind the hall. The door shut, and the silence hit harder than the explosion ever had. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I'd faced fire before, but nothing prepared me for this kind of wreckage. Reynolds entered, set a flash drive on the table, and said only one thing: "Check your Wilmington login history." Then he left. Hours later, in my hotel room, I opened the folder on the drive. Rows of system access logs scrolled past until one line froze me. User, K. Sutton, Jack accessed. June 17th. File, Fuel System Diagnostic. Authorization, Susan, Sutton EAF, Mill, Wilmington, my hometown, my family's computer. I called my mother. She answered on the second ring, her breath shaky. "Susan, don't say anything. Your father's already what?" "They said it was consulting work," she whispered. "For Kyle's business. Consulting work." The words tasted like ash. "Mom, that consulting nearly killed me. We didn't know," she cried. I hung up before she could finish. Outside, sirens wailed, fading in and out like the alarms that once screamed across the desert base. I sat there listening to the ringing in my ear, no longer from the blast, but from a truth that would never quiet. Betrayal didn't come from the enemy that night. It came from home. By sunrise, my name was everywhere. Headlines screamed the hero who exposed her family. People congratulated me online. Strangers called me brave. But I felt nothing, only the hollow quiet that follows an explosion. The Judge Advocate General's office summoned me for an emergency deposition. Before I even got there, my father appeared on local television, the flag of North Carolina behind him, and rage in his voice. He told reporters I had fabricated the entire story to hide my own mistakes, that the explosion had been my fault, that I'd killed people through incompetence, and was now destroying our family's name to save myself. By noon, Wilmington was split in two. Half called me a survivor, half called me a traitor. Even my childhood church issued a statement asking the community to pray for discernment. That afternoon, Reynolds arrived at my apartment. His uniform looked heavier than usual. He placed a folder on my table and spoke quietly. "These are the financial records. Landon Aerospace wired $420,000 to your father's company, but the signature on the deposit form matches your mother's handwriting." My chest tightened. My mother, the woman who taught me to keep peace by keeping quiet, had signed for the bribe. She didn't want to lose the house, Reynolds said softly. They called it community investment, a polite way to say hush money. Did they know what it was for? They did, and they took it anyway. I walked out without another word. The air outside felt thinner, like gravity had shifted. Driving home, my phone rang. My mother's voice was a trembling whisper. "Susan, please, he did it for us. We just needed the money for Kyle's business." He thought what? "Mom? That blood money fixes a mortgage? They said it was harmless. It almost killed me." She began to sob. "If you keep this going, you'll destroy us all." I laughed, the sound sharp and wet with tears. "No, Mom, you destroyed yourself the day you decided my life was worth less than a loan payment." When I hung up, the quiet wasn't painful anymore. It was clarity. For the first time, I saw my family not as victims of greed, but as architects of their own ruin. The week that followed was endless. Interrogations, signed statements, cross-examinations that blurred together. Each time the investigators opened the system logs, Kyle Sutton appeared in the unauthorized access column, his fingerprints on the weapon that almost killed me. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger had burned out, leaving only understanding that felt colder than grief. They let me visit him at the temporary detention center. He looked smaller behind the glass. Dark circles, hollow cheeks, the same guilt I used to carry. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "You're making this worse. I just need to know why." Dad said it was consulting work. Landon needed data to fix their software. They said you'd already agreed. "You thought I'd agree to leak classified data?" He winced. "I thought you'd forgive it. We needed the money." I leaned back, a laugh scraping out of me. "You sold my report, The one that nearly got me blown apart. He stared at his hands. I didn't know. Sue. They said it was harmless. They always say that, I said quietly, right before it explodes. I walked out. The glass door closed behind me with a final click. On the drive home, Reynolds called. His voice was low. Susan, we found the black box footage. Show me. The next morning, he played the grainy video in a secure room. A Landon technician entered the fuel testing bay 5 minutes before detonation, swiping a temporary badge signed H. Sutton Construction. External maintenance. My father's name. His signature. Reynolds turned to me. We can't use it in open court yet, but it's enough to indict. I nodded. No tears this time. Just a deep, cold certainty. What happens now? Now, he said. We make them face what they built. And as I stepped outside, the wind cut through the morning air, sharp and clean. For the first time in years, it felt like it belonged to me. 3 months later, Fort Bragg held the public hearing. Reporters crowded the gates, their cameras flashing like lightning. Inside, the courtroom smelled of metal and fear. I walked in wearing the same dress uniform from the ceremony that once shamed me, this time spotless and steady. Across the room sat my father, mother, and brother. They looked small beneath the fluorescent lights, their faces gray and hollow. The prosecutor listed the evidence one by one. The $420,000 transfer, my mother's signed email confirming receipt, the security footage of Landon Aerospace entering with a forged H, Sutton Construction Pass, and Kyle's login data. Each word felt like another blade twisting open the past. My father rose, voice rough but defiant. We did what we had to for this family. She's forgotten what loyalty means. Loyalty, I said, meeting his eyes. You call it loyalty when it kills soldiers? Soldiers die in wars. He spat. Families last forever. Reynolds stood. Families don't last when they're built on treason. When my turn came, I spoke quietly. I didn't come for revenge. The truth deserves a witness. The black box video played. Access granted. H. Sutton Construction. My father's hands shook. The judge pronounced them guilty. As I left, Reynolds whispered, "You survived blood." I walked out free. After the trial, the noise faded faster than I expected. Headlines that once shouted my name disappeared from the news cycle within weeks. Landon Aerospace collapsed under its own corruption. My father and brother began their prison sentences, and my mother quietly moved in with a cousin in Savannah. I didn't celebrate. Justice never feels like victory. It just stops the bleeding. A month later, I accepted a position as an ethics consultant for the Department of Defense. I moved into a small cabin high in the Blue Ridge Mountains, where the air smelled of pine and the mist rolled through the valley like slow-moving smoke. The silence there didn't feel empty. It felt earned. On my first morning, I unpacked my Purple Heart and hung it on the wall. The metal glimmered softly in the late afternoon sun, its violet hue reflecting against the wooden panels. For years, I thought purple meant pain. Now I saw something else in it. Resilience, survival, the quiet dignity of still being here. One October morning, an envelope arrived with no return address. Inside was a folded letter written in careful handwriting. Dear Aunt Susan, Dad told me what happened. He's in prison now, but he said you never stopped fighting. I don't blame you. I just want to know, why didn't you give up? Lily, Kyle's daughter, the girl I'd once sent birthday gifts to before her mother started hiding my letters. I sat for a long time before writing back. My hand trembled, but my heart didn't, because silence kills more people than war does. Speak, even if your voice shakes. I folded the letter and set it by the window. Outside, the wind carried the scent of pine and distant snow. For the first time in years, I felt peace. Not the kind granted by others, but the kind you earn when you finally stop running from the truth. 5 years later, I returned to Washington, not to be honored, but to speak at the Defense Whistleblower Protection Conference. The hall was filled with young service members, faces hopeful and uncertain. When the announcer introduced me as Captain Susan Sutton, recipient of the Purple Heart and survivor of the Djibouti explosion, the applause was respectful, quiet. I walked to the podium, the same medal resting against my chest. Its color faded with time. I took a breath. The first time I stood under lights like these, my family laughed. My father said courage was just luck. He was wrong. The room went still. Courage isn't about taking a bullet. It's about standing still when the bullet comes from your own blood. It's choosing truth when silence feels safer. Several faces in the back blurred with tears. I knew that look, the ache of being doubted by those you love. The Purple Heart isn't about surviving war, I said softly. It's about surviving betrayal and still choosing to serve. The audience rose, applause deep and steady. Outside, the sky burned violet and gold. I touched the metal and whispered, "Purple, the color of pain and peace." For the first time, I truly felt free.